On my birthday, my millionaire son raised his glass and said, "Mom, I hope you're enjoying the apartment I gave you." The room burst into polite laughter, but my chest tightened. I whispered back, barely audible, "Son, I live in the garage." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. My greedy daughter's hand trembled, her glass crashing to the floor. In that single moment, the mask of generosity slipped, revealing the hunger for wealth, the envy, the raw cruelty of family. And what I uncovered afterward would prove that their ambition knew no limits. When the guests left that night and the echo of shattered glass still lingered in my ears, I sat quietly in the garage, listening to the hum of the refrigerator that shared the space with my narrow bed. To understand how I ended up there, you must know who I am. My name is Evelyn Harper, and at 68, I never thought I'd be telling this story. I once stood in front of a classroom, chalk in hand, teaching children how to read. My days were filled with laughter and scraped knees, their tiny hands tugging at mine, and I carried that sense of nurturing into my own family. Life was not generous, but I managed. I buried my husband too early, wore black for years, and poured every ounce of my strength into my children. Daniel, my eldest, was the pride of my life. At 42, he had become a successful real estate developer, his name on glossy magazines and his smile on billboards around the city. He was busy, always chasing deals, but he still looked at me with those eyes that once belonged to a little boy who needed help with his math homework. Clara, my youngest, was different. At 39, she carried bitterness like a second skin. Her marriage had failed, her career never blossomed, and in every conversation there was a sharp edge, a hint of envy whenever Daniel's name came up. When Daniel suggested I move in with them, his words sounded like a blessing. "Mom, you'll be more comfortable here. We can take care of you better," he said. I believed him. I thought I was stepping into warmth, into the embrace of family again. I told myself I would be useful. I could watch the children, help them with their homework, keep the house alive with the traditions I loved. For a while, it worked. Mornings were bright. I packed school lunches, braided my granddaughter's hair, and watched my grandson's face light up when I read him stories at bedtime. But slowly, the edges began to blur. My role shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. Clara took over the household with a firm grip. She scheduled me as though I were one of the nannies she used to complain about. "Mom, breakfast is at 7 sharp. Don't cook after 9. The kids need the kitchen neat." At first I obeyed, thinking it was for the good of the house. Then it was the bathroom, certain times when I could use it, other times when I was told to wait. And finally, she pointed to the garage. "It's temporary, Mom, just until we rearrange the rooms." Temporary. The word echoed for weeks, then months. The garage became my corner, a single bed pushed against the wall, a lamp and a chair. I convinced myself I was fine. After all, I had a roof over my head. But at night, when the cold seeped through the cement floor and the sound of rats scratching behind the walls kept me awake, I wondered, was this really care or exile? Daniel didn't know. He was always flying somewhere, always negotiating deals. When he called, Clara would answer first, her voice sweet as honey. "Mom's fine. She loves her space. You know how she likes quiet." And he believed her. Why wouldn't he? He trusted her, as he always had. One afternoon, while tidying the living room, I overheard Clara on the phone. Her tone was casual, but the words cut deep. She should be grateful we didn't send her to a nursing home. I froze, clutching a stack of folded laundry, my heart thundering. Is that how she saw me? Not as a mother, not as the woman who once sat awake through endless nights of fevers and exams, but as a burden to be stored away like old furniture. If you were me, would you have confronted her? Would you have raised your voice, demanded respect? Or would you, like I did, swallow the words until they turned to acid in your chest? I stayed silent. I told myself Daniel would see the truth eventually. But silence is dangerous. It lets cruelty grow roots, Late one evening, I went to the kitchen for a glass of milk. When I opened the refrigerator, I noticed my small carton of yogurt, the one I'd bought with my own pension money, was gone. In its place was an empty space, as if erasing me little by little. I searched the trash bin, and there it was, tossed carelessly. Clara's voice rang in my head, sarcastic and sharp. "Mom doesn't need that. She should eat what we eat." I stood there, staring at the empty shelf, the cold air spilling out onto my skin, and for the first time I felt invisible in my own son's house. And then, just as I turned to close the refrigerator, I saw Clara in the hallway. She was holding the house keys, twirling them around her finger, and with deliberate care, she picked one key out, the one that locked the garage door, and slipped it into her pocket. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. She smiled, but her eyes were ice. The day of my birthday arrived with little fanfare. I baked my own apple pie that morning, the same recipe I had used every year since Daniel and Clara were children. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples filled the garage, mingling with the faint smell of oil and dust. I brushed the flour from my apron, forcing a smile at the thought of celebrating with my family. Birthdays had always been about togetherness, about laughter around the table, not about gifts or grandeur. I wanted more than anything to feel like a mother again. That evening, Daniel's house was dressed in elegance. The dining room glowed with candlelight, crystal glasses shimmered, and a bouquet of roses sat proudly at the center of the table. Daniel looked handsome, his suit sharp, his smile wide as he welcomed business associates, friends, and family. Clara moved through the room like she owned it, her dress clinging to her figure, her laugh just a touch too loud. I placed my pie discreetly at the end of the table, barely noticed among the fancy cakes the caterer had brought. As the wine flowed and the chatter filled the air, Daniel stood, glass in hand. His voice carried easily across the table. "A toast," he said, "to the woman who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me. My mother. Mom, I hope you're enjoying the apartment I gave you. You deserve the world." The word struck me like a blow. Apartment? I froze, pie fork halfway to my mouth. My lips trembled. My heart pounded in my chest. Around the table, guests clapped politely, nodding in admiration at Daniel's supposed generosity. My daughter's eyes flicked toward me, and I saw it, the fleeting shadow of panic, before she plastered on a smile. Clara laughed, a high, nervous sound, and raised her glass too quickly. I looked at Daniel, my son, my pride, my boy who had once tugged at my sleeve, begging for bedtime stories. My throat tightened as I whispered, almost to myself, "Son, I live in the garage." The words silenced the room. Every head turned toward me. The clinking of cutlery stopped mid-air. Daniel's brows furrowed in confusion. "What?" he asked softly, as though he hadn't heard right. And then, as if fate itself had chosen to speak, my grandson's voice rang clear. "Grandma's room is always freezing cold. I don't like going in there." His innocence was a knife that cut through the carefully constructed lie. Daniel's smile faltered. He turned toward Clara. "The garage?" he repeated, his tone suddenly sharp. Clara's face drained of color. She gripped her glass too tightly, and in that single second of pressure, it slipped from her hand and shattered on the polished floor. Red wine splattered like blood across the rug. No one moved. The silence was unbearable, heavy as stone. I sat there, my hands trembling under the table, wishing desperately that I could disappear, yet knowing the truth had finally cracked open. My son stared at me, confusion clouding his eyes while Clara bent quickly to gather the shards of glass, her voice trembling. "It's not what it seems." Later that night, after the guests had awkwardly left and Daniel had gone upstairs to settle the children, I retreated to the garage. I sat on the edge of my bed, the cold seeping into my bones, my heart raw. My mind echoed with one question. Had I truly become nothing but a burden? I closed my eyes and memories rushed back. Nights when I graded papers until dawn, mornings when I walked miles to save bus fare, afternoons when I skipped meals so my children could eat. I remembered the time Daniel needed money for college textbooks, and I sold my wedding ring without hesitation. I remembered the tears Clara shed after her divorce, how I held her all night, whispering that she was not alone. Every sacrifice, every piece of myself I had given, and now I was hidden in a garage like an afterthought. The door creaked open. Clara stood there, arms folded, her expression carefully constructed. "Mom, you shouldn't have embarrassed Daniel like that," she hissed. "You know he works hard. He wanted to honor you in front of his colleagues." "Honor me," my voice cracked, "by telling the world he gave me an apartment while I sleep next to a water heater?" She rolled her eyes. "You like your privacy. Daniel doesn't need to know every little detail. It's better this way." Better for whom? I wondered. But Daniel's footsteps echoed upstairs, and Clara's voice softened instantly. She leaned closer. "Please, Mom, don't say anything more. You'll only cause trouble." Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs. "Everything all right?" he called down. "Of course," Clara replied sweetly. "Mom's just tired. I'll help her settle in." She turned back to me with a look that chilled me to the core. Her eyes were sharp, warning me into silence. That night, I lay awake on the narrow bed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. My chest ached. Perhaps I should have fought harder. Perhaps I should have demanded respect. But instead, I reached for the worn leather notebook I kept by my bedside. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "They think I am weak. They think I can be hidden. But one day, the truth will be louder than their lies." Writing steadied my hand, slowed my breath. I let myself pause, let the pain wash over me, not to drown in it, but to remember I was still alive. The next morning, sunlight pierced through the small garage window. As I folded my blanket, something slipped from the shelf above my bed. A plain envelope yellowed at the edges. I picked it up and turned it over. My name was written neatly across the front. Evelyn Harper. Curiosity prickled my skin. I opened the flap, but before I could pull the papers free, I heard footsteps outside the door. Instinctively, I shoved the envelope under my pillow. Clara's voice rang out, "Mom, breakfast is ready." I forced my voice steady. "Coming." When she walked away, I sat on the bed, my hand pressed against the hidden envelope. My heart raced. What was Clara hiding from me? Why had this envelope been tucked away so carefully? The questions coiled inside me, tightening like a fist around my chest. The envelope weighed heavy in my hands as though it carried every secret Clara had tried to bury. That night, after the house fell silent, I carefully slid out the contents. Inside were bank statements, property documents, and a copy of something that made my stomach twist. A deed. My husband's handwriting flashed in my memory, his firm strokes signing the house over to me decades ago. I traced my name across the page. Evelyn Harper, the rightful owner of this home. How could I have forgotten? After his death, I tucked the deed away, too consumed with grief to think of property and titles. But it was still mine. It had always been mine. Daniel never asked for it. Clara never contributed to it. And yet, here I was, exiled to a garage while they lived as if the house belonged to them. I flipped through the rest of the papers, and that's when I saw it. My signature, but not mine. The loops were too wide, the slant too sharp. I knew my own hand better than anyone, and this was an imposter. Clara had forged my name on what looked like an agreement to add her as a co-owner. My breath caught. My chest pounded so hard I thought I might collapse. She had crossed a line so dangerous, so unforgivable, that my hands shook as I held the paper. I grabbed my old phone and snapped a photo, the flash off, my fingers trembling. Just as I clicked the last shot, the creak of the staircase echoed through the hallway. My blood froze. Footsteps, steady and purposeful, drew closer. Clara's voice, faint but distinct, hummed as she neared the study. I shoved the documents back into the envelope, slid it into the drawer, and pulled the lamp chain to darken the room. The doorknob turned. My heart stopped. "Mom?" Clara's voice drifted through the crack. "Why are you still awake?" I forced a calm I didn't feel. Just reading. Couldn't sleep. She pushed the door open slightly, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. The air between us thickened. For a moment, I thought she could smell the truth lingering in the air. Then she smiled faintly, coldly, and shut the door again. Her footsteps receded, but my pulse refused to settle. The next morning, exhaustion clung to me. I could not keep this to myself anymore. After breakfast, I slipped out under the pretense of buying groceries and made my way to a small law office downtown. My friend Margaret, once my colleague and now a retired lawyer, still kept part-time hours there. When she saw me, her eyes softened. "Evelyn, it's been years." I showed her the photographs on my phone. She studied them carefully, her brows knitting together. "This signature is not yours," she said firmly. "And more importantly, Evelyn, the deed still belongs to you. This house is legally yours. Clara has no claim." A wave of relief washed over me, followed swiftly by terror. But she's already pretending it's hers. She even told Daniel I live in a separate apartment. Margaret leaned forward, her tone grave. "That's not all." She pulled another paper from my photos and pointed at a section. "See this? Clara used this falsified co-ownership to take out a loan. She's leveraged your home as collateral. If the payments aren't made, Evelyn, you could lose everything." The room tilted around me. My fingers gripped the armrest of the chair, white-knuckled. She mortgaged my house? My home? "Yes," Margaret said gently. "And unless you confront this, she'll strip it away from you piece by piece. If you stay silent, Evelyn, you will lose everything." Her words struck like a gavel. I sat in silence, the noise of traffic outside muffled by the roar of blood in my ears. Rage coursed through me, hot and unfamiliar. Clara hadn't just pushed me into a garage. She was trying to erase me entirely. I straightened, my voice low but steady. "Then I won't be silent anymore." Margaret reached across the desk, her hand covering mine. "Good, because this is no longer about comfort, Evelyn. This is survival." I left the office with my heart pounding. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window at the city rushing by, the faces of strangers blurred in the glass. I wasn't just a forgotten mother anymore. I was a woman standing on the edge of war, and I swore to myself, I would not lose. The bus ride home blurred into a haze of noise and faces, but my mind was sharp, sharper than it had been in years. Margaret's words echoed inside me. "If you stay silent, you will lose everything." That night, when the house finally quieted and Clara's laughter drifted faintly from the living room, I returned to the garage and spread the envelope across my bed. I forced myself to go through every sheet, every line. What I discovered chilled me deeper than the cold concrete beneath my feet. Among the papers was a note tucked between bank statements. It was a printed email, half crumpled, Clara's handwriting scrawled in the margin. "Nursing facility has space in July. Good time to move her." My knees buckled. I sat back, clutching the paper as if it might dissolve in my hands. Clara wasn't satisfied with stealing my home. She wanted me gone completely. Once I was in a nursing home, she would have full access to the property, free to sell it without my protests. The betrayal was sharp, but there was worse to come. Further down in the stack, I found a withdrawal slip, my own savings account. I recognized the account number instantly, the one I had faithfully fed every month with my teacher's pension. The signature on the slip was mine, but wrong again, twisted into Clara's bold attempt to mimic me. The money, thousands of dollars, had been transferred to an investment firm in her name. My vision blurred, my breath came shallow. It was as though the floor itself had tilted, and I struggled to stay upright. The daughter I once cradled, the little girl whose hand I held on the first day of kindergarten, had stolen from me. Not just my house, not just my dignity, but the meager security I had clung to in old age. I sank onto the bed, clutching the papers to my chest. For a long moment, I thought I might collapse. But then, slowly, a new sensation rose inside me. Not weakness, but clarity. If Clara had the ruthlessness to strip me of everything, then I must find the strength to stop her. I pulled out my notebook, my companion in the silence, and wrote, "If one day I disappear, will my children remember the sacrifices that built their lives, or will they only see the space I left behind?" The words bled onto the page with the weight of truth, and I let myself weep, but only for a while. Tears were no longer enough. The following morning, I disguised my exhaustion with a steady smile and waited until Clara left to run errands. I crept into the study once more. My hands trembled as I opened the heavy safe built into the wall. Clara often kept it locked, but that morning she had been careless. Inside were more papers. One in particular caught my breath, a will. It bore my name, my supposed signature, and dated back to when I had fallen ill a few years ago. The paper transferred all assets, including the house, to Clara. But Margaret's words steadied me. Such a document, signed without witnesses and under duress, had no legal standing. It was a sham, proof of Clara's manipulation. I folded the false will carefully and tucked it into my own envelope of evidence. Every discovery was another weapon, another stone to add to my sling. The battle was coming, and I would not face it unarmed. That night, I dialed Daniel's number. My hands shook as I waited for his voice. When he answered, cheerful and tired from another long day, I forced the tremor out of mine. "Daniel," I said, "we need to have dinner together, just the family, tomorrow." There was a pause on the line. "Is everything all right, Mom?" I closed my eyes. "It will be," I whispered. After the call ended, I sat in the garage. The envelope of truths spread before me like an arsenal. Fear gnawed at my belly, yes, but behind it was steel. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of Clara's control. I wasn't afraid of the silence. I pressed the false will beneath my palm, its edges cutting into my skin. "Tomorrow," I said softly, to no one but myself, "the truth will set me free." The dining room shimmered with light that evening, the chandelier casting golden reflections across the polished table. Plates were set neatly, silverware gleamed, and Daniel, ever the gracious host, poured wine with his usual charm. Clara sat opposite me, her smile painted on too thick, her laughter carrying just a little too loudly. To anyone else, it might have looked like a perfect family dinner, but beneath the surface, tension coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. I had rehearsed this moment over and over in the solitude of the garage. Every word, every gesture. My heart pounded, but I sat straighter than I had in years. Daniel began with small talk about his latest project. The children chattered about school, and Clara leaned in, eager to steer the conversation. I let it flow for a while, allowed them to bask in the illusion of normalcy. Then, slowly, I reached beneath the table and pulled out the envelope I had guarded with my life. "Daniel," I said, my voice steady though my fingers trembled, "I need to share something with you, with all of you." Clara froze mid-laugh, her eyes darting toward me. "Mom, can this wait?" she asked quickly, her tone sharpened with warning. "No," I replied. I laid the documents across the table one by one. Like cards in a game, I had no choice but to play. "These are the deeds. This house, Daniel, is mine. Your father left it to me. It was never yours, Clara." The room fell silent. Daniel leaned forward, his brow furrowed as he scanned the paper. Clara reached for it, but I pulled it back, laying another on top. "And this," I continued, "is a bank slip from my savings account. Thousands taken, transferred without my knowledge. My signature forged." Gasps rippled across the table. Daniel's glass stopped halfway to his lips. Clara's face flushed crimson. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "You don't know what you're talking about." I looked her straight in the eye. "Then perhaps you can explain this." I placed the false will in the center, its damning ink gleaming under the chandelier. A will you made me sign when I was sick. A will that would strip me of everything I built. But it isn't legal. It's nothing but another lie. Daniel's hands shook as he picked up the document. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I turned my gaze back to him, the son I had raised with every ounce of love I had. Daniel, I want to ask you something. If you were me, would you have enough calm to expose your own child at this very table? Would you? He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening, but before he could answer, a small voice pierced the heavy silence. My granddaughter, barely 8, looked up innocently and said, "But Mom always told us Grandma was just visiting, that she didn't really live here." The words struck like a hammer. Daniel's eyes widened. He turned slowly toward Clara, disbelief flooding his features. The mask Clara had worn for so long cracked in that instant, her composure crumbling as her daughter's honesty betrayed her. Daniel's hand slipped from the table. The glass he had been holding tipped, spilling wine across the cloth, but he didn't move. He sat there, staring at me, his lips forming the question he was too stunned to ask. How long had this been going on? I remained silent. I didn't need to answer. The truth had already spoken. The storm of that night eventually passed, though the wreckage it left behind would take months to settle. Clara's voice, once so sharp and controlling, was reduced to silence in the days that followed. Daniel confronted her with the documents I had revealed, and there was no way to deny them. Lawyers were called, the forged signatures examined, and the truth came to light under the harsh glare of the law. Clara had not only betrayed me, but committed crimes. Her inheritance was cut off, and for the first time, she faced consequences she could not escape with charm or lies. Daniel, guilt written into every line of his face, came to me quietly one morning, papers in hand. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, "I can't undo what Clara did, and I can't erase the pain you've endured, but I can give you back what should never have been taken." He placed a set of keys into my palm. "This apartment is yours, in your name, no one else's." The walls of my new home were small, the furniture modest, but when I opened the windows and felt the breeze wash through, I breathed easier than I had in years. For the first time since moving into Daniel's house, I could call a place my own. I joined the senior women's club down the street, spent mornings drinking tea with neighbors, and let myself laugh again without the weight of Clara's watchful eyes pressing down on me. One spring morning, I sat by the open window and listened to the sparrows chirping in the trees. Their song was light, unburdened, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the same. A smile curved across my lips. The ache in my chest had eased. The silence around me was no longer a punishment, but a gift. Still, the scars remained. Some nights I would wake, heart racing, remembering Clara's cold smile as she pocketed the garage key. The betrayal cut deep, but it had also taught me something I could never forget. How fragile love can become when poisoned by greed, and how important it is to protect one's dignity, even from one's own blood. I began writing again, not just in my private journal, but in letters to women's groups, community forums, anywhere my voice might reach those who felt unseen. "Protect your worth," I wrote. "Do not let anyone, not even your children, erase the sacrifices you have made. Silence may feel safe, but silence is what feeds injustice." One evening, I gathered with women from the neighborhood, each with her own story of neglect or dismissal. As I shared mine, their eyes glistened with recognition. Some nodded, some whispered words of encouragement, and I realized my pain was not mine alone. It was a thread woven through countless lives, binding us together in quiet resilience. And then, one final decision came to me as naturally as breathing. I took the savings Clara had once tried to steal and redirected it, not to her, not to Daniel, but to something greater, a fund to support elderly women abandoned or mistreated by their families. It was a twist Clara would never see coming. The money she coveted became a lifeline for others like me. I signed the papers with steady hands, and for once, the ink on the page carried no deception, no betrayal, only truth. As I closed the folder, I looked out at the sunset, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. My heart was steady, lighter than it had been in decades. I thought of my husband, of the children I once held so close, of the years spent giving without expectation, and then I thought of the lesson etched forever into my bones. I whispered it to the quiet room, to the sparrows on the windowsill, and to whoever might one day hear my story. Never take a mother's love for granted. It is the foundation of everything you are. And once broken, it can never be replaced.